Hello.
Hello.
And welcome to another episode of
the Super Data Brothers Super Show.
That's right. I'm Ryan.
I am Eric.
And have we got a good one for you today, folks? Bit of a curveball here, but
yeah, boy, do we.
yeah.
I'll let you do it since it's a change.
We were originally going to have Zhamak Dehghani, creator of Data Mesh and founder of Next Data, on the show today. But it turns out that running a cutting edge data startup is quite challenging, and you never know what you're going to do on any given day. So Zhamak had to gracefully duck out today in order to run the company, I assume. But we will have her on a future episode. So we're working on rescheduling that. In her place, we've invited our top data bro, Paul Dudley, to come in to talk to us about streaming and batch in 2025, because I think that a lot of, especially our audience of analytics and BI people, have these preconceived notions about streaming and batch and when you would use one versus the other and why, that maybe aren't so true anymore in 2025. And so Paul will help us untangle that, in addition to help us go through the news of the day and all that sort of good stuff. Paul's a true data bro, and it's good to have him on here. But before we bring Paul on, of course, a few things to address. First of all, if you are watching this show and this is your first time, this is a live show. So if you get your questions, comments into the chat, we will always answer them here at Super Data Brothers. That's one of the number one things we try to do is get our audience involved. So let us know where you're watching from, and we will give you a shout out as we go through the show. Secondly, we have to thank today's sponsor, Good Data. Good Data is an end-to-end analytics and AI platform. There's a lot of really great stuff coming out. If you follow Good Data over the next couple months, especially around the agentic AI piece. So, BI is at the core of what Good Data does, but increasingly what we're looking at a future, and I think this is really our perspective on the show, not just Good Data, is where, yes, BI is a piece of what you do, but increasingly you're going to be building these kind of AI-driven data apps. And that's what Good Data is laser focused on, is giving you the tooling necessary to do that. So this is not some stuffy old BI environment that you're going to send your users into to click and drag and build charts, although it has that if you need it. But what it really is a toolkit for building the exact right AI and data experience for your consumer to give them what they need from the data. And that's something that BI has been sorely missing. So check them out at gooddata.com. Of course, a Magic Quadrant vendor, one of the vendors that made the biggest jump this year on the Magic Quadrant. You can get a free copy of the report from Good Data as well at the URL you see on the screen. So a big thank you to Good Data for being our season 4, is it season 3 or season 4? Season 4 sponsors. All right. A couple shout outs. Michael Dunphy, watching from Coalesce. Awesome, Michael. Let us know how it is. I love Coalesce, actually. It's one of my favorite conferences. I'm sorry I couldn't go this year, but it's a great one. And then we've got Tom Wilsek, friend of the show, watching from Chicago. All right. So why don't we go ahead and bring Paul into the show. Paul, it's good to have you here, man. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on. Good to join you guys. Also joining from Coalesce. So Cub reporter on the scene here.
Yep. So, Paul, how is Coalesce this year? What's the vibe like? I think we have an important news item related to Coalesce to discuss.
Yeah.
But what's the overall vibe?
I mean, it's been good. I think there's depending on who you talk to, a little bit of end of an era kind of feeling, and for DBT and also for Coalesce potentially. It's a little unclear like how this event itself will look in the future. So I mean, we could go deeper into some of the context behind that when we get into the the news on the 5-channel DBT. But I will say it has been good, and a good time as always. So and a lot of people are here. It's good to connect with friends and colleagues and partners and customers and everything. So yeah, it's been good.
Awesome. Michael, if you get a chance, if you should say hi to Paul. He's a cool dude. Also, fun fact, Paul was one of the inspirations for my growing a mustache. So thank you for that, Paul.
Is that where that came from?
Yeah, actually. So Paul, before we get into the news and today's Hero of Data, why don't you give everybody a quick introduction to who you are and what you do in the data space? Yeah,
so I'm a co-founder and CEO of Streamkap, which is a streaming ETL and stream processing platform. So a bit like a 5-trend for streaming. Before Streamkap, we've been around for around 3 years. And before that, had a batch ETL startup, some more direct 5-trend competitor. And then before that, worked for a data platform company and spent a long time in SaaS and analytics throughout my career.
Awesome. Thank you. And if you're just tuning in and you didn't see us in the intro, Paul's joined us. Unfortunately, Zhamak wasn't able to make it today to do the show. She will come on later in the season. Don't worry about that. But Paul was a true bro and stepped in last minute so that we could get some context, get someone live reporting from Coalesce, which is really helpful and help us do today's show. So a big thank you to Paul for joining on. All right. Let's talk about the Hero of Data. Today's Hero of Data is Luca. How do I pronounce this? Luca Pacioli, right? So this guy is the father of accounting. Picture it's Renaissance Italy, Florence, Venice. This is the center of art and trade. Everybody's getting rich, but everybody's books are total chaos. Okay, so it's really hard to track where the money goes. And then Luca Pacioli steps in. He's a Franciscan friar born in Tuscany in the 1440s. He trained in mathematics, spent his early years tutoring the sons of wealthy merchants. And from that kind of learned how they struggled to actually track their fortunes, right? So in 1494, he publishes a book, Summa de Arithmetica, which is a huge math textbook for the modern world. And in it, he has this one little chapter called Particularis de Computis et Scripturis, okay? Which, for the first time, described and codified double entry bookkeeping. And so this is, if you don't know, this is the kind of the foundation of modern accounting, where you have debits and credits. Every debit must match a credit. Every transaction balances, and at the end of it, you can kind of balance the books and figure out whether you had a profit or a loss. This all stems from this one chapter of his general mathematics book. This is the foundation of modern business. It really spread throughout Europe and became the basis of how we determine whether or not we made money as an individual or as a business. He goes on to teach across Italy. He becomes a collaborator of Leonardo da Vinci and ushers mathematics into the heart of commerce. So he's remembered as the father of accounting. Of course, he didn't invent double entry bookkeeping, but he was the one who codified it and explained it in a way that other people could use it. You could just as easily call him the world's first great data modeler. He really gave us the idea that truth can be found in the numbers themselves. So think of him next time you're reconciling a data set, closing a book, or trying to make numbers make sense. Think of Luca Pacioli, the father of accounting, and today's hero of data. I did take one accounting class in college, and it turns out I'm not great at that.
No,
no, I am not. All right, so let's get into the news. Today's first news item is here we go. So 5-trend plus DBT. It actually happened, or at least it was announced to happen.
Yeah, it was announced to happen.
So this is something the rumor's been out there for a while. It was first reported a couple weeks ago. And then on Monday, they announced that they do intend to merge. 5-trend's CEO will be the CEO of the new merged company, whereas Tristan Harris, the CEO of DBT, will be the president of the board. Paul, you're at the conference right now. DBT has such a passionate and unique community and fan base. And I use the term fan base instead of like users, because DBT people are kind of in my mind, the data engineering equivalent of Tableau people in BI. There's lots of things you could use, tools you could use to do your transformation. And DBT people are the ones who are like really into it in the same way Tableau people were that for BI 10 years ago. So like, what's the vibe? How do people feel about this? You kind of talked a little bit about it at the intro, but could you go a little deeper on it?
Yeah, I would say like the vibe in person here is more positive than online. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of uncertainty. I think Tristan did a very good job in his keynote of sort of emphasizing that things are not going to change dramatically in terms of open source, and George from Fivetran also emphasized that, as he put it, he would be stupid to do anything to disrupt the community, which obviously would be. So I think they're saying the right things, and Tristan was telling me that like he generally had gotten good feedback. I think he kind of would get good feedback. I don't think that many people would be brave enough probably to like come up to his face and tell him they really didn't like it. But I don't know. I think there's some aspect of like anybody who's really paying attention understood that like certainly once DBT signed up for a $4 billion valuation, which they did in their last funding round in 21, I think it was, at some point the sort of kumbaya party was going to stop, and it couldn't be solely about community. And we are now at that point. So I think the big question for me is, can they maintain that going forward? And, it's like I say, they're saying the right things. I think, my sense of the way that DBT operates is that their intent would be to keep doing these things. But you just don't know, right? And Fivetran has a very different culture, I think, than DBT does, right? And that's one of the big questions in any merger is, and a big reason why mergers don't work out is if their cultures don't mesh well, and so I think that piece really remains to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at historically, in my mind, the most famous example of a merger, it worked out from the investor's perspective, but when Boeing and McDonnell Douglas merged, Boeing was an engineering driven company. McDonnell Douglas was kind of a financials driven company. And I think, the McDonnell Douglas culture won.
Yeah.
And they've certainly made lots of money, but now, the doors are falling off of the planes. And so you can ask yourself, whether or not that worked out. It certainly worked out for the investors.
Pacioli's legacy there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
True.
Right.
There you go.
Doors,
That's that guy's
having
fault.
the door on the plane made the number at the bottom of the book a little worse. And so no more doors.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen? My feeling is that DBT culture was inevitably going to have to fade even without a merger, because they're just one way or another, they have to transition to the harvest phase, and the harvest phase is not fun when you're a user, And so this is like, if anything, it's nice. I would say like it gives you a clear chapter break if you're a real DBT fan, where you can look at it and say, that's what happened.
Yeah, and then DBT also doesn't have to be the bad guys. Like the Fivetran side of the house can be the bad guys, which they're obviously not shy about doing to their pissing off their user base.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. I mean, those of us in BI long enough have gone through this. All the major BI players, they tend to get acquired. They get really big and then they get acquired within 7 to 10 years. I would say. And so it's, whether you're...
And the product just stops getting any better.
Right. Yeah, that's been our experience.
Yeah. Like Michael Python, it can't be worse than Salesforce acquiring Tableau, right? Yep.
Exactly. See, people were really stung by that acquisition.
Oh yeah.
I do think it's like, I think it's much less likely to be as disruptive to the product than like Tableau or Looker. I don't know if Looker was as disruptive to the product as it was to like the way they did business and support and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I think they are very synergistic. Like it seems very unlikely to me that Fivetran is just going to let DBT die on the vine as a certainly as a commercial product, right? Like, but and I think they're setting themselves up, right? I think they're both and this was, by the way, in their presentation in the keynote, like Tristan pointed out that you have Snowflake and Databricks and Fabric all presenting an all-in-one solution, and their positioning was, okay, well, DBT plus Fivetran is, we're doing almost all of this, but it's open compute layer. And so it gives them a way to, like, even if like, I mean, they're saying the open source is still going to be around, but like, even if there's some concerns about that, like, well, we do have this openness around the compute layer for now. We'll see about that. But I think it's sort of their way to like buffer against like the bigger players, presenting competitive technologies for both Fivetran and DBT.
Exactly, and I wonder if the long-term strategy here is to get acquired by someone who for whom these two players together would be more appealing, or are they going to continue to build out and say, hey, we can be full stack? Does this combined entity in 12 months acquire whoever? Omni? I don't know. Probably not. Omni's very well funded. They don't need to be acquired, but there could be someone in the BI space or other front end tooling that would want to join up. So we'll see where it goes.
Compute engine of some kind, right? Like,
right.
Fivetran's already doing some maybe early work on like Iceberg management. So they're doing like some of that, they're starting to manage the storage layer of your, what would once have been a data warehouse. And, the only missing piece is that open compute layer. But I was talking to Tristan yesterday, and he was saying that, like, their vision is that you would be able to essentially orchestrate your compute, and you'd be able to send the right jobs to the right places. And, I think that is actually appealing. And that is kind of the spirit of Iceberg, right? Like, if Iceberg delivers on its promise, it's that you have your data stored, and then you can freely move that around. And you can imagine DBT being a very effective tool for kind of orchestrating that, essentially, beyond just, orchestrating queries in one database, but actually deciding which compute is most appropriate and most efficient. But yeah, we'll see. But to your earlier point, I think it also makes them much more attractive for either Snowflake or Databricks to acquire. I think a defensive play for Snowflake, because now all of a sudden, I think like DBT is always the #1 driver of compute on Snowflake every year. And then Fivetran, I think, is #2. I'm not so sure about that. But collectively, they're obviously like a very large driver of Snowflake compute. And so all of a sudden you have this higher degree of exposure for Snowflake, where, sort of they have a defensive incentive to maybe pick them up, because Databricks could come in. And if Databricks acquires them, that gives them a very good path to access maybe not the majority, but a large plurality of Snowflake compute and customers. And that becomes pretty interesting. And I don't know what the combined entity valuation is, but let's say it's $10 billion or something. Like, that's a big pill to swallow. But in the context of sort of existential risk for your customer base, it's not unachievable for either Snowflake or Databricks, right?
Definitely not. Michael does say, I felt like interoperability was a keyword in the keynote. So lots of talk of that, I assume.
Yeah, for sure. I think like my takeaway was that was very much around like interoperability for the compute layer in particular. But maybe Mike will pick up more than that. But that was what I took away. Was the open compute layer. All
right. Well, we've also got this week a some news around ClickHouse. So ClickHouse extended its Series C and brought in backing from some pretty big names, like City Ventures is probably the biggest one on there. And then they reported out, it was a breakout year, 4x ARR growth. They passed 2,000 customers. And if you look at their strategy, I think of ClickHouse predominantly like, oh, this is a database, right? But they're really trying to move, it seems like, again, can we branch out into additional parts of the stack, right? And so I know that like you guys work with ClickHouse a lot. What's your take on ClickHouse and where it fits into the kind of the data stack at this point?
Yeah, so ClickHouse, the background is ClickHouse was it's a long-standing open source project. I think it's Apache 2 licensed in 2012 or something like that, or I don't know, mid-teens. And it actually came out of Yandex, which is like the Google of Russia. So it was like Yandex Analytics, like, analogous to Google Analytics, ran on ClickHouse. So it's like very good at sort of large scale event data. And then, so open source project grew a lot through the teens and early 2020s. And then I can't remember exactly when they started the commercial entity, but they started the company in 22 or something like that. And, started offering ClickHouse Cloud. And they definitely, like, I think their initial growth was very much in kind of the log data and real-time use cases, which is where we often work with them, kind of real-time customer-facing analytics, that sort of thing. But I went to their conference earlier this year, and where they announced the first part of their seed. And obviously they're growing super fast. And I think they've articulated, product strategy that is much more expansive than it's traditionally been. So I think, like, we talk to people who migrate workloads from Elasticsearch. It's faster, it's cheaper. In fact, we use ClickHouse in our product in a use case where we had considered using Elasticsearch, but it was going to be too slow and expensive, and then ClickHouse worked really great for it. But I think they, like, more relevant, I think, to the sort of modern data stack and to your audience, they definitely are making more of a push for, like, the data warehousing workloads, which traditionally have not been a core focus for them. Like, we run into them occasionally in that context, but more often like in on-prem, where they're a reasonably good option, but traditionally they've had like some weakness there in terms of the product, like not super strong join performance, a SQL dialect that is kind of its own thing, and not not super friendly to folks who are familiar with ANSI SQL. But they're kind of making a big push there, both on join performance and I think their usability as a data warehouse in the format that we're kind of more familiar with. And then also seeing they're going into observability and building products that, like, give you kind of an open source Datadog, let's say. And so they're growing on a lot of dimensions, I think, at this point. And it's a pretty interesting platform. One of the topics we're going to talk about later of batch and streaming, like, they're interesting in that context, because if you think about, like, the way that Snowflake operates, right? You have some big machines that are sitting there, and ideally you're like turning them on for as little time as possible, right? Like, every once in a while you spin it up and you run a job or run a query, and then you turn it back off, right? Whereas ClickHouse is much more oriented around, and the reason why it works so well for low latency stuff is it's more like a merge on write, and so rather than having a machine that turns on and off, you have a machine that's running all the time. You could be streaming data in all the time. It's designed to be running at very high capacity at any given time, and because you're doing kind of merge on writes, it's effectively like a materialized view. It supports real time without increasing cost, and it's very cost effective. It's very fast. So I think there's a lot of interesting things along those lines that are their seeks of growth. And I haven't actually mentioned it, but AI, it's obviously another thing there. So yeah.
We see them a lot now in the data warehouse space. A lot of our customers are now coming to us and interested in our opinions on ClickHouse, at least considering a migration to it, and a lot of new prospects. They're already building on it now. Good Data, we do have a lot of customers in Europe, and the company's headquartered in Prague. So we do a decent amount of business with large Eastern European firms. That may be part of why I'm seeing it a lot more. But I think just in general, the vibe around ClickHouse is, this is kind of up and coming. In the data warehouse space, I'll tell you what I hear about, Paul, is basically if you're looking at an up and coming company, it's either DuckDB/MotherDuck or ClickHouse. Those are the two that I hear.
Yeah, but I think like DuckDB, I don't know, I spent a lot of time with the DuckDB folks in general, and while I've been here, and I think their high level story is like they're really great, fast and cheap, and they have their small data conference, right? So their kind of argument is that for 99% of queries, you just don't need the amount of compute that we all kind of have available to us, or the size of machines, and the distributed compute, I guess, is actually the specific thing, right? So, and like that's up to, let's say 10 terabytes kind of scale of data. Basically, you just don't need distributed compute for it. So it's very interesting there. ClickHouse, has actually CHDB, which is like a DuckDB-like offering, and then ClickHouse itself can scale to a massive scale. Like Tesla runs open source ClickHouse, and they at the ClickHouse conference said that they have a quadrillion row table.
I saw that
on ClickHouse. And somebody was telling me the other day that they produce, I think in the context of that, there's like, they're adding 1 billion rows a day. No, it's less than that. It's like 1 billion rows, I don't know, second or something. I can't remember the actual time scale. Maybe second seems insane. That can't be right. But like some absurd number that so big you kind of like it's hard to put your head around it. But yeah, it's very good at that extremely large scale. So I think in that sense, like they overlap in the middle, ClickHouse and MotherDuck, but they sort of represent opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of
absolutely. I will say I do agree with MotherDuck. I think a lot that at least for analytics, for traditional analytics workloads, there are companies that need to do analytics on a quadrillion rows, but there's a lot of companies where it's like our the biggest table in our data warehouse is 42 million.
Yeah. A friend of mine has a startup called Graybeam that they sit kind of between your BI and Snowflake and run DuckDB, and they'll just take queries that don't need they kind of handle that like handoff on queries that don't need the Snowflake scale, and they see customers save a lot of money often because they're handing off 90% of their queries to run in DuckDB essentially.
Absolutely. All right. Now, this is one news item near and dear to me and Eric's heart. Sigma adds pixel perfect reporting. So this is might strike you as an unexciting update, right? Who cares about pixel perfect reporting? For those of you who don't know what this is kind of the pre-Tableau way of doing business intelligence. So this is more of the formatted report, header, footer, table
generated
numbers.
PDF. Multiple pages, you can email the PDF, like the old school stuff.
This is the old school stuff. And what's really interesting about this is none of the vendors that have come out over the last really 15 years have added this feature set, even though it was very requested. I will tell you that. I know that for a fact from knowing product people at Tableau and many of these companies that this was always a feature request and a major one, because the legacy BI platforms, this is what they were built on. So let's imagine that you are at a company and you had been doing BI on business objects forever. And then starting in 2014, Tableau started coming in, and you flash forward to 2020 and you're primarily a Tableau company. And you've migrated everything you can off of business objects, but there's this huge bucket of workload in this classic kind of burst report, prompted report, PDF automation that you wanted to move to Tableau, but you never could. And Tableau was adamant.
PDF report, that kind of stuff.
Exactly, right? This is the old school reporting. It really literally mimics a sheet of paper that in the pre-BI days, you would have generated and printed off and handed to someone. Well, to see Sigma make this investment, to me, is a sign that Sigma views themselves, they're in a position, they feel, to go after that workload in a way that nobody has been willing to in the past. So you don't hear a lot about the Cognos and the business objects of the world anymore, but they still have huge
yeah.
install bases with huge revenue streams.
Yeah. I work at a university that gives millions of dollars to IBM because there's just some stuff like you can't, Power BI is growing, Tableau is growing within the university, but there's like the bread and butter reports, like ripping that out would be such a huge lift that it's not going to happen.
Exactly. And not only would it be hard, it wouldn't be possible. These other tools do not offer this feature set. And if Sigma is looking to has added it, that to me that's the sign that Sigma has reached the phase where they think they can go to, General Motors or JP Morgan and say, rip out Cognos, rip out business objects. We can do the whole thing for you. And they're the first tool to step up and try that, in my opinion. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. QuickSight, Amazon QuickSight also has some pixel perfect reporting and paginated reports and bursting, but it seems like Amazon QuickSight really just wants to be the cheap thing that is part of the Amazon ecosystem, right? It's like it's almost by coincidence that it has good pixel perfect reporting. It's like I don't think they're like advertising and targeting like old school vendors for this feature, but it sounds like Sigma might be.
Yeah. My read on QuickSight is Amazon's not really trying to make big money on QuickSight. They're just trying to prevent you from spending that money with someone else. Yeah. Didn't they recently make QuickSight cheaper? Like, wasn't that?
Yeah,
they did a little bit, and they're God, what do they call it now? They even I think they've kind of rolled QuickSight into more of an AI centric product offering. I'll do a deep dive on that. We can talk about it next week.
Yeah.
So, interesting move in the BI space. I think Sigma, it makes a lot of sense. Sigma has a lot of momentum right now. They joined the Magic Quadrant last year in BI, and we'll see where it goes. But this is, in my mind, like it's an unsexy, bold move designed to make money rather than to generate press or impress people in the data space. And that's how I think of Sigma, actually.
Yeah. In fact, I bet we're the only ones talking about pixel perfect reporting.
We probably are. You heard it here first, folks, because nobody else cares. But that's how I think of Sigma. Sigma is the new BI player whose goal is to make money. And they're not trying to impress anyone with their tool. It's a good tool. And I'm not saying it's bad. But like their view of how do we generate revenue, I think, is very strong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Tom Wilson, yes, it's Quick Suite. That's
called Quick Suite.
Quick Suite. That's the QuickSight is now Quick Suite. Oh, how fancy!
Yeah, and then finally, before we get to the deep dive with Paul on streaming and batch, Confluent for sale? ? So this is something, Paul, I think you wanted to talk about. Fill us in on this. What is Confluent, and what does its sale mean if it sells?
So Confluent is the public company. They're the creators and maintainers of Apache Kafka. They now have a big focus on Flink as well. And, there's other place you go for your, streaming and event-driven architecture. Streamkap also built on Kafka and Flink, by the way. So, they've been around a long time. They actually, there's a lot of talk these days with AI companies and, how quickly they're getting to 100 million ARR. Confluent was actually one of the very first companies that got there so fast they were talking about it before they went public. So this is, 2016, 2017, something like that. They got there in 3 years or something, which at the time was the fastest anybody had ever done it. I can't remember the exact numbers, but very fast growing company, but very much used in kind of event driven architectures for folks who are doing streaming. They're kind of in the hot data company space, thinking about Snowflake, Databricks. I think they're kind of the maybe from an investor perspective, they're like the other little guy over here. And I say little, they're $1 billion revenue company. But I think if you compare that to and they're growing they're $1 billion company growing 25% versus $4 billion companies growing 30 to 50% in the case of Snowflake and Databricks. And so I think their stock has been kind of hammered this year. And I mean, at one point, I think they were down to a $7 billion valuation market cap, which is kind of insane, actually, for a $1 billion company that's growing 20%, right? I think it's unjustifiably a low price. So my suspicion there, but so there was somebody leaked something to the press a couple weeks ago saying that Confluent's potentially up for sale. My suspicion is that was like private equity, because by the way, they have like over $1 billion of cash. So $1 billion revenue company that's profitable, that has $1 billion of cash and is only cost $7 billion is like, kind of hostile takeover territory of like, you just want to own it. So I don't think I don't think probably the Confluent people are looking to sell necessarily, but it's the kind of thing where if private equity could actually get that deal done, they would love that, right? But it's just more of a reflection, I think, of like their, I think, relative position in the market compared to the hyperscalers and Snowflake and Databricks, and a perception that they are not capitalizing on AI in the way that maybe Snowflake and particularly Databricks are, and that's kind of hit the stock. But one specific thing that happened is they didn't announce who this was, but like in their earnings earlier this year, they said they lost a very large AI customer that was paying them $150 million or something like that. And the rumor was that was OpenAI. And so, because OpenAI uses Kafka and Flink in their architecture for ChatGPT and elsewhere. And so there's some negative signal in that, obviously, if the AI company is moving off your platform. But I actually think it is kind of bullish for Confluent, in that, yeah, sure, like the biggest company is not using your cloud product anymore. But what does that say? The fact that they still use the open source project, what does that say about the importance of streaming data for AI? And like, okay, OpenAI is not using it, but like as enterprises mature their AI, like they're going to have similar needs to some of the stuff that OpenAI is doing, and they're probably not going to want to run it themselves necessarily. So I think they're probably at a bit of a low point where, like I say, the financial guys would probably want to make that acquisition, but I think from a product perspective, they're not not in as bad a spot as maybe it might seem.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting the way tech companies are valued. Is it's like there's this explosively high valuation track, and then if you ever find yourself in the unenviable situation of just being a really good cash flow positive business, then your valuation tanks, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like in any of, if we were talking about like someone who like I don't know, manufactured like fittings for industrial sized tubing, and what you just described, it'd be like, oh yeah, like this is a great company,
Yeah.
20% growth, $1 billion cash on hand. So that's just part of the tech world, I guess.
Yeah, particularly the AI world, where like obviously there's just absurd amounts of money, or the idea of money. Like you could make an argument, all this like circular
there's
stuff.
No real money.
NVIDIA, and Oracle, and OpenAI, what have you, or AMD now, and I don't know. There was another one at the sales. So everybody's getting in on it, but there's a lot of money being spent that doesn't yet exist yet.
Yeah.
So, but in that world, like 500, like OpenAI growing to 12 billion in revenue, and $500 billion valuation, $1 billion of revenue looks pretty pedestrian.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to, let's talk about streaming a little bit. So, Streamkap, that's what you guys focus on. I think, so from our audience's perspective, their contact with this debate, say streaming versus batch, comes from predominantly analytics, data warehousing, business intelligence style workloads. And traditionally, BI people are, I would say, dismissive of streaming. They don't believe anybody really needs it. And to be fair, if what you predominantly produce is reports to help close the books at the end of the month, like, okay, yeah, like that use case, we don't need to stream that data, perhaps. But there are these other perceptions analytics people have, like, oh, streaming's very expensive, it's not worth doing. So let's start there. What does that look like in 2025? And are these ideas still accurate?
Yeah. So I will freely agree that, like, it is still very valid to, ask, if you're building a BI report, ask your stakeholders like what they actually need, really understand the time scales they need. They say real time, go ahead and ask the question, like, what does that mean to you? Because, as I think we've all experienced, like somebody says that, and then what they actually mean is hour later, every 15 minutes or something, right? But what I think is changing, to your sort of latter point there, is that, maybe I'll take a step back. So what Streamkap does, we do a lot of change data capture. We're getting data into Snowflake, into ClickHouse. Our systems are sub-second. So like, we're basically removing kind of the batch ETL slowness. And we're generally cheaper than batch ETL tools like Fivetran. Well, we are always cheaper than Fivetran. But I think what's changing is actually a couple of things we've already talked about a little bit. So like ClickHouse, for example, I mentioned kind of merge on write concept. And so in that context, if you're streaming data in, it doesn't cost you any more, right? Because the compute's already running. And even running a report more frequently, well, you're not running a report, right? Like it's just, you're running on a materialized view. So depending on how your BI tool interacts with that, like you're not necessarily introducing more compute there. The data is just live and it doesn't cost more to do that, right? So I think a big thing that's changing, and I think probably in the BI context is most likely to change, is not necessarily that like you're going to have a dramatic change from a BI perspective on like the requirements, but if it becomes, cost competitive and no more complex, and it's just like real time by default, like you wouldn't say no to that, right? And I think the more immediate drivers of it are cases where there is a harder requirement. So, we see a lot in customer-facing reporting, where the customer, downstream customer needs it's outbound to the customer, or there's some kind of machine consuming it, right? So if it's going into other compute systems and things like that, then there's you're not waiting for human to look at it to do something. Like having the data in real time matters, and then also in operational context where you really do need real time or near real time data. So I think that is often the driver, but what we're seeing is like generally things are getting easier and less expensive. Even in Snowflake context, we work a lot at loading data through Snowpipe streaming, and it's a separate serverless process. And so actually our customers often save money versus batch loading because it costs like $30 a terabyte to load data. So you kind of think of it like a background process that just gets the raw data into Snowflake. And now you might still only run, the sort of transformations or the, turning the warehouse on every 15 minutes or every hour, but the raw data is just there. And it gives you that option where rather than having this complex process where each step is some batch process, the data just arrives and then you're just turning the dial on your data warehouse on how quick you want it to go. So yeah, we are starting to see that it actually can be, it depends on the systems, but in a lot of cases it's cheaper. It's no more complex now. And that really does change the sort of calculus of where you might use it.
So what has changed to make it cheaper in many instances than batch? Because historically that was not the case, right? One of the reasons to choose batch was it costs less money.
Yeah. So let's look at Snowflake specifically. So the way that, and I'll pick on Fivetran. The way Fivetran loads data is they do a merge into, and so whatever cadence that you have Fivetran loading data, it's going to turn a warehouse on every single time that that job runs. And it's going to run for however long it takes to merge the data into those tables. And that's going to cost you. So the more frequently that you do it, the more time your data warehouse is going on. And then if you were streaming in, that means basically that warehouse is running 100% of the time, which, as we talked about earlier in the ClickHouse context, is really not how Snowflake is designed, and gets expensive that way. But as vendors build better support for it, they're often building more elegant solutions than that. So like Snowpipe streaming, where it's this low cost background process that is just a lot more efficient, and all of a sudden you just don't have that trade off. Now, like I say, there's still you're still turning your warehouse on to create the sort of maybe the gold layer or something like that for your dashboards, but that kind of underlying data loading is cheaper. And then again, like similar thing with or a different approach with ClickHouse, but again, their architecture is just fundamentally different, into that like it's built for streaming, and streaming doesn't introduce more cost in that context.
And is it like you mentioned the core technologies that Streamkap is built on? I mean, is that really what's changed? Is it just like, hey, technology gets better?
That is part of it too. Like I think we do still see folks who, I guess there's a mindset shift actually on the streaming side of things. So I've been talking about the databases, but what we've done at Streamkap is we take the lower level infrastructure of Kafka and abstract that away. And so we give an experience that's similar to like a Fivetran or something like that. So at the simplest level, you're just connecting a source database and a destination. And then, by default, the data just arrives sub-second. You're not thinking about any of that lower level infrastructure. And so even with managed Kafka services like Confluent or like Amazon MSK, you're still kind of dealing with lower level systems. So like the constraint there that I think does still exist if you're trying to use those systems is you're often making more of a commitment to like overall event-driven architecture. And so you're kind of starting with these lower level infrastructure pieces and you're kind of building up from there. And it still requires a fairly sophisticated engineering and DevOps to make that stuff work in a way that folks familiar with like the modern data stack just aren't used to dealing with that level of complexity. And so there is a higher total cost of ownership if you're going to do that approach, just because of the type of folks you need to have working on it and the amount of time they need to dedicate it. So that, not to pivot too hard into a pitch, but that's like that's our reason for being, is to bring you the power of those things, but you don't have to think about managing all the lower level stuff. And so you kind of get the ease of what you're used to with the modern data stack type tools, but then, with streaming and without adding more cost. And then, I don't know, for example, like Fivetran, my sense is their pricing is not really driven by their operational margins. It's more about covering the very significant R&D cost of maintaining all those connectors. In fact, when George was on the stage at Coalesce, he said the business model of, or maybe Tristan said this about him. Anyway, one of them said that the business model of Fivetran was early on was fix the connectors before the customer churns. And so if you have 700 API connectors that you're maintaining, that's just a big R&D workload. And so I think that's the reason why they charge so much is basically they have to cover all the human capital costs of maintaining all that stuff. And so for us, we have we're able to provide a lower latency and lower cost and still have a good margin business.
Yeah, and to me, look, again, it's not a product pitch, but that seems, in some ways, it becomes a no-brainer, right? Lower latency plus lower costs versus a more traditional kind of batch data movement process. Like, why would you say no? I'm curious your customer base. I mean, what kind of use cases what are your customers? What use cases do they have that they come to you and say, hey, we need Streamkap to accomplish X? What does that look like?
It does generally start with some more firm requirement for low latency. Although sometimes I was just talking to somebody yesterday who they kind of need some low latency stuff, but their biggest pain point is really just their Fivetran cost. So sometimes it's just Fivetran cost. And then you kind of get then you also have low latency. But yeah, most of the time they have some kind of customer facing reporting. So we work with folks in payments, or point of sale and restaurants where you have a large footprint, or your customer base has a large footprint of your interfaces that are out in front of the customer, and you just can't tolerate low latency there, or high latency there. We see folks in logistics, fleet management. I was talking to somebody who does I don't know too much their business, but they have a lot of distributed IoT type devices in people's homes, and there's a lot you can do with that data that they're actually not doing. Actually, the other thing there is that with IoT data, often if you can do stream processing, so not just streaming, but actually run some compute on it, IoT devices produce an incredible amount of data, or can. And usually it doesn't necessarily make sense to store all that and do kind of big aggregate, on reporting on the stored data. But if you can do some, aggregations on the data as it's arriving, and retain only some of those higher level metrics, that can be valuable as a way to manage things. In fact, that's what we do in our platform. So we, like our use case for ClickHouse internally is that, you know, we run Kafka. It produces billions of log events per day. And it just doesn't make sense for us to store that, but we do want to give our customers metrics. So we store, like, you know, for a couple of weeks, all of the data, because it's useful for debugging, things like that. But after that, we just store the aggregates. And so if you can do that kind of processing in real time, it's a way to, you know, get the data you need out of it, out of huge scales, and you know, not have to retain everything for those look backs and things like that.
I mean, it's definitely I would say your need to do streaming is, in my experience, at least in the analytics space, it's really connected a lot to how much your data and your reporting is connected to stuff happening out in the real world, right?
Yeah.
I did a project now, this was 6 years ago or so, with it's actually the largest management group for Taco Bells in the United States, which as a huge Taco Bell super fan was really exciting for me. And they would sometimes tell me, like, hey, this item's coming back to the menu, like, before it was public. So I felt very cool. But it was one of those situations where we just, like, what they really needed was what you offer, Paul. Like, they needed the store manager to have access to their different performance metrics, you know, as they were happening. And the best we could deliver was essentially, by noon, we will give you the metrics from the day before.
Yeah.
Right. And like in the context of, hey, I'm an analytics team, and I mostly support, you know, the Office of Finance and HR and kind of these core corporate enterprise functions, that's fine, right? If you can get it to them, you know, sometime in the morning, next day, no problem. But if you're running 370 Taco Bells scattered throughout the Southeast United States, like, it actually, you do need something that, like, what Streamkap offers.
Yeah, like, what are our stock levels? Who do we need to, like, get more taco shells to ASAP?
Right.
And actually, Chick-fil-A has a really they do some really cool stuff with, like, edge computing, and, like, they're deploying machines in stores, and so they do streaming, but they're doing some stream processing there at the edge, essentially at the store. And I'm kind of butchering details, but there's some guy who, like, used to work on, like, edge computing in, like, F-16s or something, who now runs data or part of the data stuff at Chick-fil-A, and he's doing, like, you know, similar kind of concept. So there's some really cool stuff that's happening along those lines, which actually, by the way, like, if you listen to sort of Cloudflare's pitch on their data stack, I don't know if you guys have looked at that. I think they live in a little different realm, but they actually launched a data platform built on Iceberg. They have R2, which is their version of S3, which is S3 compatible, has no egress. And their whole thing is, like, their expectation is, especially with AI, you'll see a lot more edge compute. So that might be on device, but it also could be, I don't know if they call it edge, actually. Maybe edge is on device, but then, like, rather than coming all the way back to a data center, you know, the way Cloudflare works is they have all this, you know, very distributed network of, you know, their, I don't know if they call it a data center, but anyway, their operations, let's say, and, like, rather than coming all the way back to like big centralized data centers, you might come just a little bit to your close local network area for some compute, and then back out. So there's some really interesting things happening there, which I think we'll see with AI, right? Like, you see the thing about self-driving cars, right? Like, a lot of compute has to happen on the car, because it doesn't make sense to, like, you can't afford the latency of going back out.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Anyway,
yeah.
The
batch processing to your self-driving car that shows up the next morning by 8.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think one of my favorite analogies for people who, like let's say friends and family who are not in data, you know, just like, they think about your experience with Uber, right? Like, it would not be useful to do matching and updates on where your car is every hour. Like,
right.
You need to know, like, what's happening in real time. And like, Uber just wouldn't work as a product if it didn't have real time. So, and we're getting more used to that, by the way, as consumers. And so I think that drives, like, more of this, as well as, like, more businesses, like, more consumers have the expectation that they know what's happening all the time. You know, you see it with shipping, like, you know, so it used to be that you just, like, got an email that your order was received, and then, like, 2 weeks later, your stuff would show up. And you know, now at least some services, like, give you real time. Some don't still, but yeah. So it's all kind of moving that direction.
I mean, we've come a long way. You think about, there are plenty of historic examples of battles that were fought 6 weeks after the war ended, because it took 8 weeks for news to stop fighting to reach
There's that famous Japanese guy who was on some Pacific island. 40 years later.
Yeah, he needed data streaming badly. Actually, batch would have worked for him too. I don't know.
Yeah, like the daily would have been fine.
Would have been fine. Yeah, the grain of that update. Last question. I know you got to run. You're at Coalesce. So how do you see AI factoring into all of this? I mean, is it just a case where, as we have these autonomous decision-making systems, it only makes sense to give them the most recent data possible? Yeah,
I think so. Like, I think an analogy I like to use is like how we think about our support in our application, right? So like, and so we're low latency, so it is important for us to respond to things quickly. Like the easiest thing that like every business is doing in some form or other is like dump some information that you have and then give somebody a chatbot, right? Like, so we can put our docs as like context for a chatbot. And, that's trivially easy to add to our application. Somebody can ask a question. It's just a faster way for them to get the answer from docs. But that's like maybe 20% better than just having docs. Like, it's not super useful. But you can imagine that like another layer of context is like, we've got a shared Slack with that customer. So adding all of the historical conversation that gives all the context on setup, that adds another layer of context, which, everybody's talking a lot about context. But actually to do like what our human engineers do when they resolve a problem is they're looking at what just happened in the logs, right? And that would be much more powerful. We haven't built this yet for our chat, for our support, but like you can imagine, if you ask like, hey, why is this pipeline broken? And our system's able to analyze in real time what's happening in the logs, what is the state of that, that connector before, like what was the configuration, and having all that data in real time is so much more powerful. And obviously, I'm talking about chatbot, but actually even the ideal state there is like use all that information and have an agent that actually fixes the thing before any human ever knows that there was an issue, right? And you just have to have real-time data for that. And there's a ton of context for agents where you can envision that would be required. I think we're still very early on that. And that goes back a little bit to, why Confluent hasn't probably seen like, they're not ripping yet, is that I think most businesses are still kind of at those earlier stages. They might be using it in production, but they're kind of using the simpler architectures that are easier to get to. But as those things mature, in a lot of contexts, real-time data will become super, super valuable.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, Paul, especially on such short notice. Where can people keep up with you?
You can follow me on LinkedIn, which I guess you can get just from the thing here. And then, streamkap.com if you want to check out Streamkap.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, Paul. Enjoy Coalesce, by the way. And
thank you.
I'm sure, Paul and I are like conference buddies. We see each other constantly. So I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thanks, guys.
See you, man.
Thank you.
All right. Streamkap.com. Do check him out. So a couple points of order. Thank you for joining us here today and sticking with us through the episode. Really thankful for Paul for coming on. And look, I do think throughout most of my career, the reason you didn't do real time is it just was like, hey, it's just too expensive. Right?
Yeah. Why would I?
Why would you? Right. And now if the economics have changed and the question becomes, well, why wouldn't you? That is a pretty big change for us practitioners, right? And there might be reasons why not to, right? But if it's like, actually it's cheaper to stream,
why not?
Then why not?
Why not?
So do check them out at streamkap.com. A couple points of order. One, we want to thank our season sponsor, Good Data. Good Data is an end-to-end agentic analytics platform that you can use to build real AI-driven front-end experiences for your data consumers. So this is not a traditional BI tool where you're just going to give it to 1,000 analysts and say, here's the training, good luck, folks. This is something that you're going to have a team of more skilled, thoughtful engineers building out the perfect data experience for your different customers. And that's not always the same. This is one of the knocks on BI tools is different people need a different experience. And BI tools are kind of a one size fits all, which is one of the reasons why BI tool adoption has been stuck in the mud for 15 plus years. Good Data is different. So check them out at gooddata.com. A couple other things to mention. Folks, the Data in the D conference is coming up November 8th. Ooh, that's right. Wow. So I curated the BI and analytics track. If you attend and you're interested in BI and analytics, we have some really good presentations in that track. But more than anything, if you're asking yourself, why should I come to a data conference in Detroit? One of the biggest reasons is actually to experience Detroit. Detroit is, I promise you, nothing like what you think. Little story. As I travel the world, which I do a lot, the number one thing when I would say I'm from Detroit that people would say to me was you'd see them wince, right? They'd be like, ooh, have you ever been shot? You know, you get something like that. Nowadays, almost every time I get, oh, I've wanted to go to Detroit. I have a friend who went to Detroit. They said it was amazing. So we have a great conference. Joe Reese is the keynote speaker. But come see our city. You are going to be blown away. The other biggest question I get, Eric, can you guess what it is?
Why'd you grow that mustache?
No, well, I get that a lot lately. No, it's have you ever seen Eminem?
Oh, really?
Yeah, I get it all the time, especially overseas. Right?
What about like they're not asking about Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope?
No, they don't ask about Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope too much. That's we keep that to ourselves.
Okay.
So yeah, check it out, datainthed.org, and do come and join us at the conference. Next week, we have Ryan Boyd from Mother Duck joining us. So I've been hoping to get Ryan on for a long time. I am a huge fan of both the technology and the company, so really excited to have Ryan joining us next week. Get your questions in. As you know, we will ask them, so do that. All right. Anything else we got to tell the people about, Eric?
Like and subscribe. We do this every Thursday.
We suck at that, right? We are so bad at we need to do that in the intro,
in the middle, in the middle,
right?
When
every 10 minutes, we just get a timer that says tell people to click the buttons. Click the buttons, folks, if you're still with us, and please tell your friends about the show. All right.
Yep. YouTube and LinkedIn. Both.
That's right. Until next week, I'm Ryan.
I am Eric.
And we are the Super Data Brothers. Take care, everybody. Bye.